It's my pleasure to welcome back the CEO of Strangeworks, whurley. Always a pleasure to have you on Seeking Delphi.
It is a pleasure to be here talking to you again. It has been a couple years since we last chatted in this
Eh,
format.
Almost, yeah. It was March of last year and it's December, so it is almost 2 years. So let's, for those who either didn't hear it or heard it but don't remember, remind us what you're doing. What is Strangeworks? What are you doing with it? And how has it progressed since we spoke almost 2 years ago?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we're a software company in Austin, Texas, focused on quantum computing. We are the builders of quantumcomputing.com, which is a free open community of people trying to learn, software developers, researchers, data scientists, how they can apply quantum computing, trying to learn how to work with the different frameworks, et cetera, et cetera. We basically took all of those frameworks to start and put them together on one platform, one interface, one IDE. We started a community outside of that with Stack Overflow that's now over 7,300 people in it, which was 200 people, I think, when you and I talked last. So that's come quite a long ways. And we've been just expanding on what the community wants out of that platform. So it's now available in Japanese and Chinese in addition to English. There'll probably be 3 or 4 more languages. And as we said at South by, the plan was launch in South by March 2018, launch a product into beta March 2019, launch a product available to everybody March 2020, and we look like we're hitting all of those schedules and milestones. So we're learning as much as we can from the community and trying to help build things that will help them. And there's been used at ETH. Cesar Rodriguez Rosario, who's our new chief science officer, kicked off other quantum information for developers there, where everybody used the platform in their hackathon. Turkey, which is a quantum group in Turkey, has been using it, I think, this week if you check on Twitter, and it's being used in dozens of other places and by hundreds of people around the world. And so there's a lot to learn and add, change, delete, modify as we get now within a 90-day launch window of it becoming available to everyone.
Now, refresh everyone's memory, including mine, on why this interface project is so important vis-a-vis how quantum computing programming has been previously done.
Well, so look, quantum computing has been, held in the domain of physicists primarily, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And they have done an amazing job of bringing it to the point it's at. But it's been my belief that we're in this kind of state of computing where you have, all the HPC techniques, you have TPUs and GPUs and FPGA accelerated systems, but we're running into problems where the evaluation time soars as you barely increase the amount of inputs. People always want to use the traveling salesman. That's kind of overplayed, I think. We've been working on some new examples that we can announce with the release. But the idea here is that we grow as a community together. We grow as an industry together, that if we are to fulfill all the dreams that we have about quantum computing, we need to greatly expand the number of people that have access to it, the number of people that are trained on it. I mean, there's not really a quantum workforce, right? We're seeing that already in the startups and in the companies that are trying to hire for people to work on physical machines and software SDKs and things like that. And that gets much, much worse as you go out into the enterprise. We have been working with a number of enterprises. One of them, over the course of a year, came up with one person they thought would be the quantum person inside the enterprise. But we go out, marketing comes into play in advertising. We go read in all of the online publications how there's, all of these people, just this pent up demand for quantum computing. And that may be true, right? But there's nobody to execute on that. If I had a 1,000,000 qubit machine and dropped it in the middle of San Francisco or Tokyo or New York, I'm personally not convinced that there would be anybody that could utilize that to its full extent. We've spent a lot of time in the hardware area. It's time to break out the software. It's time to build a bigger, stronger community, and it's time to bring everyone together to really get, high school students, college students educated, people in the workforce. This computing is going to change everything in the next 10 years more than it's changed in the last 100. I mean, I believe in quantum computing and material science. I believe in quantum computing in pharma, in finance, in aerospace, in automotive, right? There's all of these things that they can dramatically affect, and there's a social kind of, the human condition it can affect. Can it be used to create things that help combat climate change? Can it be used to do things and help clean up the ocean? What about cleaner power supplies or better batteries that aren't such an environmental hazard? This is the most important step I believe we've taken in computing ever. But I believe we need a lot more people involved. It can't just be the same couple hundred people you see at every conference around. It can't just be a few of the top universities. There are 23 million developers worldwide, and there are millions of researchers, and they should all have some sort of democratized level access to this.
Well, obviously, though, the hardware requirements being what they are, we're not all of us going to have a quantum computer on the desktop. So how is this going to be made available to the broader audience? I assume in the cloud in some respect?
So yeah, I mean, we launched in March, and we joked that we did it a little more Beyonce, a little less Elon. So we didn't go out and do a big press release. I mean, one of the things, that's both a criticism and a compliment of Strangeworks is we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary, and we've done one press release that entire time. And it's not that we're being overly secretive. We're very transparent. We're open. We want everybody. In every presentation, we have a slide that has a picture of our office here in Austin, and we say, feel free to stop by and email us. We have an email address, goquantum@strangeworks.com, which I'll share with your audience now. And if you're curious, if you want to work stuff, you want to get earlier access to the beta, whatever, we're happy to talk to everybody, right? But the thing is right now, let's face it, there is a lot of work that can be done with quantum inspired and with simulators, especially if you're talking about training people how to program, understand teleportation, understand superposition, understand entanglement, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need physical access to a machine to provide great amounts of value. Now, we have access to the machines. So on the platform, you can run in the simulators hosted on our cloud. You can run outside to an IBM simulator hosted by IBM or an IBM physical machine, or you can run to a D-Wave simulator, a D-Wave machine, et cetera, et cetera. So that access is available, but let's face it, what is a 20-qubit machine good for? Like what can you actually, as not a physicist, and not to be harsh, but as a developer, what can I actually do with that machine for my business, right? And the delta between that and using a simulator from an education standpoint, from getting my head wrapped around it, understanding how it fits in my developer workflow, things like that, is just simply not that much. Now, if you had a 500 qubit machine, that gets super interesting, right? And we'd want to help democratize access to that. But even a 53 qubit, IBM's new machine that's online, it's not that you can't do stuff with it, but we talk about these things as if they're computers already, and they're not. They're really, really advanced, really good equipment for exploring the quantum landscape. But they're far, far from being the computers that we boast about. And I think we just have to have a realistic view. I got into this 2 years ago and met you and told you I want to make every developer, kind of quantum enabled. I want them to be, a quantum computing developer. And I learned in the last 2 years, it's a lot harder than that, right? I mean, I knew it would be hard, but it's even harder than I expected. And I was, woefully optimistic about that. So I think that, getting this ability to educate people, getting the ability to get the tools, the library examples, things like that in people's hands has been a big focus for Strangeworks in the first couple of years. And now we'll move into application of these things and all of the stuff we've learned in the past 2 years as we look forward to the next 2 years.
Well, I'm impressed by your saying you're even trying to get people to understand things like quantum superposition. Which one of the founders of quantum mechanics was it that said that nobody understands it?
Yeah, Feynman said, if you think you know quantum mechanics, then you don't know anything about quantum mechanics, or something to that effect. But we've went really fast, and I'm going to have to hide who I wrote this out to, because this is actually a Christmas present for someone else in the community. But we wrote that awesome book, you might remember, Quantum Computing for Babies, because we're extremely excited and serious about making this accessible on a hopefully fundamentally different level. I mean, my audience is at 23 million developers worldwide, the 10 million plus researchers worldwide. And yes, we have our eyes on the enterprise, and yes, we're working with enterprises. But there is a big delta between where we think we're at and where we're at as far as these things getting implemented enterprise-wide. Our team is, if you put us head to head with other teams on physicists, We have 2, and they're amazing. Other teams have 30, but if you put us head to head on software development, we are one of the most experienced entrepreneurial and software development teams in the business and on the enterprise side. And I'm just here to tell you, like, we've talked about a quantum winner before. We talked about it 2 years ago. I think, I told you 2020, so we'll see. We should talk. We should make a deal to talk in December and see what's happened this year. But I think that you're seeing these mass spikes when people come on platforms. So a couple 100,000 people sign up, and then a few weeks later, there's maybe 1,000 people that are still coming checking back. You see people log in and go, oh, here's a great example. They run it, and it says, here's the collapsed state of the qubits, 100010, and they go, oh, that's cool, right? There's not any really great examples of how you apply and get engineering or business value out of this that can be done at scale, right? And so I think the more people we get involved, the more we create a big feedback loop where you start with the hardware manufacturer, you make the hardware accessible through quantumcomputing.com. It's accessible to thousands of people who give feedback back to that manufacturer, and we start advancing the pace of quantum faster and faster and faster and faster as we move forward. And I hope that by doing that, we can take things like the NISC period we say is the next 3 to 5 years and maybe make it 2 years. And maybe we could take that 10-year, quantum advantage point or whatever and move it back and make it, 5 years. I fundamentally believe that that's possible if we have enough people with enough access in the space.
Well, that's interesting. And clearly, as you are trying to create the software that makes it accessible to a broad range of developers and maybe eventually a broad range of users and not just physicists, that's great. But let's talk about the state of the art in the hardware, because there's a lot of controversy going on there. And I know it may not be your favorite subject, but a lot of people may have heard recently about this claim of quantum supremacy from Google and having actually solved a problem in 200 seconds that would take 10,000 years on a regular computer, which sounds impressive. But what does that mean for where you're going and actually being able to get the kind of power and enough qubits, so to speak, to really make this more than just hypothetical and preliminary and beta, to make this really usable for science and industry, business, government, whatever?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I always am skeptical about benchmarking tests. That's part of the reason one of the first things the Strangeworks did was we worked with the IEEE to set up 2 new quantum computing standards, one on nomenclature and the second one on benchmarking. And the reason that I'm always skeptical is because traditionally you dig in, and everyone can see this, right? Go Google D-Wave Scott Aronson, or go Google, we could name any company, we could name any professor at a university, and there's someone says, we're 1 billion times faster, and someone says, bullshit, I ran this on my laptop and it's faster, right? Benchmarking tests are inherently flawed. I mean, we don't optimize the solvers traditionally as computer scientists on the competing machine, and we optimize the hell out of it on our platform, and we go, look at how much better it is, and it's not really an apples to apples comparison. So I stay away. It's kind of like you're at a party and somebody's dropping heavy drugs and you're like, I don't do that. I'm at a quantum event and people are like, quantum supremacy. And I'm like, oh, no, thanks. I'll go sit at the bar by myself. I think even John Preskill has kind of dialed that back a little bit. I understand where everybody wants to go with it, but these computers are not superior to a classical computer in the way that term implies, or quantum advantage, a little better term, but even I don't think we have the right term is my point. And the reason I say that is most of these quantum machines are controlled by classical computers, so they are inherently dependent upon classical computing. As a developer, most of the things I would be using it for are going to be classical programs that then get to some computational complexity that I send to the quantum computer like a coprocessor and then continue along my workflow. So I think the idea of supremacy in general, I'm not a fan of, but I understand the intent, even though I thought you were going to go with the racist thing, which was worrying me, because I don't know if you've seen, there's a paper now online a bunch of people signing it that say, quantum supremacy is an inherently racist term. And I don't want to touch that one any more than I want to touch, is the computer supreme? So I think what we need accurate benchmarking standards to which everything can be compared. And that's going to be difficult, right? It's going to be difficult to get people to accept them. It's going to have to come from either some consortium or some open, something that somebody can, that we can all really trust. And each one of these machines are going to be different. You have ion traps and annealers and circuit gates and photonic, quantum inspired stuff. And so how do you even compare those different architectures in a way that you could legitimately say, this is absolutely, a better machine that is performing this better? Remember, no matter what anybody tells you, on this sticky note and this pen, I can do calculations, right? And I can do a lot of calculations on this. I do like 1 + 1 and 1 + 3, maybe some basic linear algebra. But the fact is, the computers that we're talking on right now to do this interview, the iPhone that we use to send the mails and the messages to each other to set this interview up, they don't do anything we can't do with our fingers and toes and pen and paper. It's just that it might take me 100 years, and it takes a computer a fraction of a hundredth of a second, right? So the same way, I think it's a misnomer to say quantum computers do things that classical computers could never do, and then in the same breath say it would take the classical computer 200,000 years and take us 10 seconds. Because what that says is the classical computer isn't incapable of doing it. It's incapable of doing it within a time frame that is useful to us, right? And that is super important. That is phenomenal. These machines, I based my entire rest of my career around Strangeworks in this company. I definitely believe. But I think we need a little bit of realism, right? The reason we want a quantum computer isn't to change every program that we do. We want it to solve those problems that we don't want to wait for answers for. We don't want to wait 200,000 years to find a cure for cancer. We don't want to wait 1,000,000 years to find something that would affect climate change. And these machines are going to be super useful at so many things. I think even more than we as an industry claim they will be. But to go from quantum supremacy, quantum advantage, all these terms, I think it might be looking at it through the wrong lens.
So for maybe one last question here, or encompassing question, and that is, again, to get back to where the state of the art is. You mentioned a variety of different hardware approaches, and I'm completely unprejudiced because I don't understand how any of them work, to be perfectly honest. But my job is not to do that. That's your job to do that and figure out a better way to provide software and to program them. But who do you think is anyone standing out now? Any one company, any one approach in the lead? And are there going to be any differences in terms of the different approaches and what they might be used for, or how they might be used?
So what you're saying is, whurley, as Switzerland in this quantum scene, don't be Switzerland and go and compare all of my friends and all of these hardware platforms. Is that the question? Did I understand right?
In a way, and look, if you want to pass and be neutral, I'll think of something else to ask.
No, we're very neutral, and I have no problem with it. But I think, I'm very excited to see, Q2B this year. Honeywell had some stuff they were touting. You just saw PsiQuantum get 238 million in funding, I believe it was. You're seeing all this activity. I'm not as excited about an architecture within hardware as I am about the fact that when we started, there were 4 or 5, and now there's 40 or 50 little projects going on. Everything from what Alexi's doing at Bleximo with trying to design specific chips for specific things, and you've still got the Rigettis and all the ones that we know and love and have been around forever. But now you've got IonQ making tons of progress, PsiQuantum getting all this funding, Alpine in Germany. You've got companies not just in the US, right? You've got companies globally. You've got Atos selling their quantum simulators, at a higher rate. So I'm just happy to see the funding going into the hardware and all of these different techniques being done. And hopefully we'll have a benchmarking standard to compare something that's optical based to something that's topological qubit to something that's, because remember, it's like hardware architecture is different, techniques are different. So are you using lasers? Are you just chilling things down? Are you just doing everything? There's also a difference in all these qubits, physical versus logical versus topological, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just excited. The more, the merrier. Of course, I have a company that builds a platform that benefits from there being more of those, right? So, it is somewhat, in transparency, self-serving to say, let's have 100 platforms, right? And obviously that would be ridiculous. But the thing is I'm less excited about a particular architecture. I think the state of the art is this. We saw, think about the history of quantum, and I use this in every presentation. So for those of you listening or watching, I apologize. I'm going to say the same repetitious thing again, but I think it's incredibly important. 1927, quantum theory comes in at the Fifth Solvay Conference. Irving, Schrodinger, Einstein. 55 years before Feynman and Benioff in 82 come up with the idea of using the spin of the particle as a bit, right? From there, another 18 years before Los Alamos has 7 qubits. 6 years after that, I believe it was, before MIT did 12 qubits. Then in 2017 to 2019, we went from 17 to 50 to 72 to 128 to 160. And now you have, some people claiming that they're going to be at, a few thousands of these. And there's even some people that have, privately been talking about in 5 years, it can be at 1 million. That is incredibly exciting. That's what excites me about the hardware, is that, it took all of that time for quantum mechanics to kind of bake in, and all of this time to get to just a few qubits. And then in the last 3 years, we see this big uptick, right? And that's exciting, because I think we need to get into the, high hundreds, low thousands of qubits for us to really start seeing some material breakthroughs that carry over into the mass market. I don't want to upset all of my quantum physicist friends or my quantum physicists, because there's a lot of things that from a physics perspective are fascinating right where we're at, and these big innovations are happening. And I don't discredit those at all. But I'm looking at this from a global mass adoption. How are all aerospace companies using it on a daily basis, not in just experiments or trials or things like that. And so from there, we've got a ways to go. So I'm just excited to see the funding coming in, both from governments around the world, from venture capitalists around the world. I was super excited to see, Psi Quantum's around, just because 238 million invested in a hardware company. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And that's good for everybody. Everybody, even other hardware manufacturers, should be happy to see that, because there was a while this year where things kind of started waving as to, did we kind of jump the shark? Was there too much quantum hype? Is there going to be investment in these things? So it's really, really nice to see the investments on all sides of the house, hardware and software, but for me, especially in the hardware side.
So based on what you're saying, do we have am I sticking my neck out to say we're sort of seeing the quantum equivalent of Moore's law, or maybe we should create a Whurley's law?
No, I think there will never be a Whurley's law. And we'll break for editing so that hopefully, if there ever is in the future, somebody can use that and know that I said it will never be. But there's a Shokoff's law. There's a lot of laws. I don't want to be in any of the laws. No, I don't think we're there yet. Although it is easy and tempting to start piecing that together, and for me to say something like, every year the number of qubits will double or whatever. But those things are irrelevant. I mean, what matters is at the beginning of the ecosystem, having the funding, the support, and the collaboration, right? We need everyone working together, because this is a space race, right? I said it in 2018. I said it to you. I believe this is the space race of our time. I believe this is the quantum making it into computing, further into sensors, being basically these quantum machines. This is, to me, one of the biggest things that has happened to society from a technological standpoint. And so I want to see mass collaboration. I want to see a ton of funding. This is the thing that's exciting. That uptick to the left, let me tell you what that did. Didn't create Whurley's law. It did get me to make the jump after, at this point, 7 years or so of research I had put in leading up to kind of where we're at today, to say now is the right time for me to move into the space. But I don't think that it's going to be a Moore's law, right? To answer, to kind of comment on that directly, I believe that as we get more qubits, we'll fundamentally solve problems with quantum mechanics, which will make it accelerate. So it doesn't go like this. I think it's going to go like that. Like, I really think, and that's why when I talk to enterprise leadership, so I want to go out and I talk to governments, I explained to them, like, this is not something you can be sleeping on. I believe that, January 2020 is, for quantum is January 1983 for the internet. There's 650 sites and there's a little bit of infrastructure and there's some stuff happening and there's a bunch of people running around like chickens with their head cut off yelling, the internet, but nobody can see the, billions and trillions of dollars of effect over the next, 30, 40 years, whatever, on the economy. And I think quantum is the same way. I think people should be preparing it. I think we should be teaching this in computer science at universities as a standard part of all of the computer science curriculum. I think the government should be educating themselves on the effects, both pro and con. I think this is fundamentally the biggest thing that I think has happened, and I'm literally betting my career and my livelihood on that. And I've been doing advanced technology stuff for quite a while, and so I am 100% focused on the democratization, the availability, and the collaboration around this, because I think that's going to solve a lot of problems that are going to make the world a better place for my kids and hopefully my kids' kids. Because right now, I look at my kids' future when they're 20 or 30, they're 2 and 3, and I worry about it.
Well, I must say your enthusiasm is a little bit infectious, and it's great to see. And maybe in a year or two, again, we'll do another update and see how it's progressed. But for now, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to talk to you.